What's up guys, welcome to another week's episode of GetPsyched, and today we're going to be doing a video for some of the psychology graduates out there. We're going to be looking at the top jobs for any psychology graduate. Guys, also don't forget to subscribe to GetPsyched if you've been enjoying our weekly content. We look at all things mental health and psychology, not just for psychology students, but for the general public as well. So if you're enjoying the videos, make sure to hit the like button, you can share it and you can comment and I'll get back to you. And if you've been enjoying GetPsyched as a whole, then make sure to subscribe to GetPsyched. You can hit that little bell next to the subscribe button as well and you'll get weekly reminders every time I upload. Also, make sure to watch this video right to the end, guys, because I'm going to be taking a look at some voluntary positions that are going to be really good for people who have psychology degrees that are looking to progress in a career in psychology. Anyway, let's get down to the video. And the first job that we're going to take a look at is healthcare assistants. Now, a healthcare assistant is very similar to a support worker, and we're going to look a little bit at support workers in a minute. But basically, the job of a healthcare assistant is to work in medicalised centres, psychological centres, looking at working with people who are maybe experiencing some difficulties, either medically or psychologically. Your job is basically to assist medical staff or nursing staff or psychological staff in the treatment of those individuals. Now, this job is actually great for a number of different reasons. First of all, it gets you that experience in working in an MDT, a multidisciplinary team, which is so important when you're thinking of progressing in psychology or when you've kind of got that psychology degree and looking to go into a career right now. A healthcare assistant job is actually ideal for both of them, whether you're looking to progress in psychology or whether you've got that great degree in psychology and you're looking to establish a career. It's also one of those jobs that really puts into play a kind of practical element to the things that you've been learning. One of the things in psychology, as you'll understand if you're a psychology graduate, is you've been learning a whole bunch of theory, been learning a ton of stuff, loads of empirical research, lots of theoretical research, and sometimes that stuff can feel a bit woolly. Well, a healthcare assistant is actually one of those jobs where you start putting that theory into practice. It's really beneficial. You're working with individuals on a practical level. You're actually applying the things that you've learned and helping others. And that's what this is all about, really. There's also something here about being one of those kind of first port of calls. Now, with many of the jobs for psychology graduates, one of the best reasons for obtaining them is actually you're kind of almost in that front line. You're getting pushed to the very front. You're working with people, you're helping with treatment plans in the very early stages of working as a healthcare assistant. So it's a really beneficial job for anybody who is looking for good work after the psychology degree. Okay, the next job for anybody who is a psychology graduate, or one of the top jobs for all psychology graduates, has to be an assistant psychologist. And one of the questions that I get a lot is, what can I do with my psychology degree? Well, one of the key things is to be looking for assistant psychology positions. I do a lot of speaking with the BPS, I do a lot of speaking at different organisations and different universities even. And even through GetPsyched, people ask me questions about what they can do with their psychology degree or what are some of the good jobs that they can get as a psychology graduate. The first one I always point to is an assistant psychology role. Now, there are a couple of things that we've got to keep in mind here. First of all, assistant psychology roles have to be one of the most competitive roles in the whole of the psychology realm, particularly for psychology graduates. These positions, it's not uncommon for one position, for one role as an assistant psychologist to be gaining hundreds of applicants. When I got my assistant psychology position, by the way, if you're interested in how to get that psychology job position, I'm going to be putting a link above my head here for a recent video that we did a couple of months ago on how to get that assistant psychology job. So make sure to check that out. But I talk a little bit about my assistant psychology role. And actually in my job, there were hundreds of applicants. They were even coming on an international basis. There was people coming from mainland Europe. There was people coming from the Republic of Ireland to Scotland just to interview for that job. So it shows you just how competitive they are. I'm not going to go into too much detail about how to actually get that job right now because we've covered that in that recent video. So make sure to check that out. But there are a couple of things that you've got to keep in mind. First, you need to have that psychology degree. Obviously, you need to be a psychology graduate, which this video is for. You need to also be thinking a little bit about networking. Now, I've used this story before, but I worked with a colleague who actually obtained her assistant psychology position simply by networking with the organisation. She offered her time voluntarily. She worked one day a week as a voluntary assistant psychologist. And then when the job came about, she was the first person to be considered for that role. And she got it, of course she did, because she had lived experience in that organisation. So one of the things that I get a little bit frustrated with sometimes with psychology graduates is that they sit back and they wait for these jobs to open up. You need to engage with the community, engage with the psychological community, psychological centres, even within the kind of general population, adult mental health or child mental health, all these kind of services, privately, NHS, all of these kind of services are going to provide assistant psychology positions at some point. engage with those services, get your name known, engage with the clinical psychologists or the counselling psychologists who are running those positions. That's going to be a really beneficial thing for when those job opportunities come around. One of the best things about an assistant psychology position is that there's a massive amount of learning. Again, it's much like that healthcare assistant role. You're practically implementing the theoretical knowledge that you've learned from your undergraduate degree. So you're kind of investing in that process of working in multidisciplinary teams, working on the front line with clients, creating psychological treatment plans with clinical psychologists and with counselling psychologists. You're gaining so much experience. Again, an assistant psychology position can be a really good initial position for somebody who's looking to just establish a career after their psychology graduate. After the psychology graduate degree. It's also a great job for somebody who's looking to progress themselves into the field of psychology. So I really want to kind of hit those two factors, people who are looking for careers after the psychology degree and people who are looking for that progression in their psychology career. Both of those things, an assistant psychology position can be ideal for you. It may be important to keep in mind a couple of things though. If you're looking at the clinical psychology doctorate, an assistant psychology position is almost a must. I know people who have had multiple assistant psychology positions and at times still struggle to get on the clinical psychology doctorate interview process. So it's worth keeping in mind there. Also, it's not the highest paying job in the world. There are a few permanent positions. One of the things that happens with assistant psychology roles is that they anticipate that you will progress in your career in psychology. So this isn't just going to be, you're not just going to stop there. And I know I said it can be a good job for people that are looking to just establish a career, but off the back of gaining some good experience, you're not going to be expected to stay in that position for an extended amount of time. When I worked in my assistant psychology role, when one of the assistant psychologists had met their year, so like when they had hit a year of working there, often the clinical psychologist would have an interview with them and say, right, listen, what are you doing next? So it's a really good position for progressing, but keep in mind it's not maybe the best job in the world for having, as a permanent job for the rest of your life. Something to keep in mind there. Okay, the next job is a job that's really close to my heart because it's one of the first jobs that I had when I started thinking about a career in psychology, and that's as a support worker. Working as a support worker is a really beneficial position because like all the other jobs, you're getting that first-hand experience. But what's even better about it is that you don't necessarily need to have that psychology degree right there and then. You can actually be working like I did. I worked as a support worker alongside my psychology degree, close to finishing. So it was a really good position to be kind of working part-time with, to gain some experience in working with individuals, utilizing some of the psychological theory that I was learning and applying it. Much like many of the positions we've already talked about, support worker gives that like kind of personable experience. You're kind of working on the front line with people. You're creating treatment plans. You're assisting in the care of other people. And ultimately, if you can do that, that's great experience for progressing your career in psychology. I worked with children with additional support needs, but you can work in many different centres. Basic general mental health, adult mental health, child mental health, brain injury, learning support. All these kind of services utilise support workers. So there's plenty of opportunity to gain experience as a support worker. This kind of next job that I'm talking about is going to encompass a number of different things, because one of the things I did want to cover in this video was the idea of pursuing careers that are not necessarily in psychology, but people who have psychology degrees. So that often is the case when it comes to like teaching or working in the police, for example. Psychology degrees are very sought after. Working as a teaching assistant can be a really beneficial thing if you're looking at educational psychology, but again, it can be a really beneficial thing if you're just looking to progress in your career in psychology. I actually worked as a teaching assistant for a summer to kind of gain that experience of working with young people and again, benefiting from just practically implementing the theoretical knowledge that I was utilizing or that I was learning. So a teaching assistant can be a really beneficial thing, not just for educational psychology students or people looking to go into educational psychology, but for people in general who have psychology degrees. And I think it's really important that when we consider the top jobs for psychology graduates, we need to be thinking about industries out with psychology as well. And I think one of those is the police. I think that's a really the psychology degree can be a really beneficial thing for that service. And there's often a case where people can kind of progress through the ranks quite highly if they've got good degrees. Psychology degrees are one of those things that they seek. The next job I'm going to be taking a look at is research assistants. Now, research assistant roles are really important to be thinking about because they're almost like the kind of next step or, kind of similar to assistant psychology positions. If you're looking at a clinical psychology role or counselling or any kind of psychology doctorate role, if you've got an assistant psychology position and a research assistant psychology position in the psychological field, that's a really good kind of tandem to be having. Research assistant positions come up every now and again if you go on jobs.ac.uk or you look on indeed.com, or your university may even publish them as positions within their university. That's how I got my research assistant jobs. They do appear on those sites. More often than not though, a lot of these positions are given to people who just network. So for me, when I was a research assistant, I contacted the professor in one of the psychology departments at my university, offered my experience, offered to work for him, and pretty much just got the job. He obviously interviewed me and stuff, and he looked at my experience and what I was looking to do, and I got the position. It was a really good job for me in my initial stages of my doctorate because I was actually working at the university that I was studying at. So it was a really positive thing for me. But a research assistant can be hugely beneficial. It's the other side of the coin, really. It's not the practical working with people stuff, it's the utilizing the science side of things. And if you can have positions like healthcare assistants or support worker or an assistant psychologist, you've been working with the practical stuff, you've been working with people on the front line. If you can also show that kind of scientist practitioner element, that you've been working in an academic field, that's a positive thing as well. You're kind of really well equipped to be progressing in your career in psychology. So a research assistant position is really beneficial to be looking at. Research assistant positions can actually be better paid than some of the other positions I've talked about today. Not always, but if you're looking for a little bit more income as you progress in your psychology degrees or as you go into your doctorate, or if you're just looking for a better paying job in psychology, research assistant could be the one for you. One of the other positions I wanted to take a look at for top jobs for psychology graduates is thinking about the clinical psychology course. Now, there'll be a lot of debate as to whether or not this is a job, but you are theoretically studying, you are working for the NHS, you are getting paid. So I don't think it would be appropriate to not mention it. A lot of people talk to me about their psychology doctorates that they're doing and the funding process, and it can be really challenging. And I did counselling psychology, and I know that privately paying for that is tough. But if you're worried about that, if you're looking for an income basis, a clinical psychology position or going on the clinical psychology doctorate could be a really beneficial thing to be thinking about, because right now it's salaried. I don't think it's always going to be like that, but right now you're getting paid for that. Have a little bit of a think of that, because you're going to have to think about the other positions I've talked about in order to gain that experience to then get on the doctorate. But I think it's worth mentioning. Okay guys, so we've been taking a look at the top psychology jobs for psychology graduates, but I wanted also to add a little bit of extra stuff to this at the very end here and looking at voluntary positions. Now I know people accessing this video may not necessarily be interested in voluntary positions, but if you're looking to progress in your career in psychology, it's a vital component of your experience development. And one of the best things that I did was I volunteered as a helpline counsellor. I volunteered for Childline and I volunteered for another organisation in Glasgow. And it was a really beneficial thing for me because I was actually working as a therapist, and using that experience to then get me on the counselling psychology degree was really, really beneficial. So yes, they're not paid. Yes, they take up a bit of time, although not that much throughout the week, but they are so important to be thinking about if you're looking at progressing a career in psychology. If you're a volunteer therapist on the helpline, you actually don't necessarily need a therapy degree. You don't need a psychology degree even as such. You get a little bit of training, of course, through the organisations, but if you're looking to then progress your career in psychology, say you've just got that psychology undergrad or you're in the process of doing it, you're about to become a graduate, if you can utilise some of these voluntary experiences and gaining experience of actually working with people, that's going to be a really beneficial thing for progressing you to your doctorate. Okay guys, today we've been taking a look at the top jobs for all psychology graduates. I hope that you've enjoyed today's video. Make sure to comment down below. You can let me know your thoughts on some of these points. You can let me know if I've missed anything or if there's jobs that you've had that you found really beneficial as a psychology graduate. Thanks again so much for watching guys. If you've been enjoying today's video, make sure to like the video and you can share it. And if you've been enjoying GetPsyched as a whole, make sure to subscribe to us. You can hit that little bell next to the subscribe button and you'll get weekly reminders every time we upload. Thanks again so much for watching guys, and hopefully catch you next week.